Tom was no ordinary tourist. He had spent months saving up for this trip, dreaming of the day he'd step foot in London. The city of kings, queens, and centuries-old history. Finally, after a long flight and an even longer wait at customs, he arrived. The moment he stepped out of Heathrow Airport, the cool British air hit him like a welcome hug. This was it. His adventure had begun. With his backpack slung over one shoulder and a camera dangling around his neck, Tom wasted no time diving into the city's charm. By day, he wandered through bustling streets, snapping pictures of Big Ben, the Tower Bridge, and the sprawling green parks that dotted the urban landscape. He marveled at the double-decker buses, tried fish and chips for the first time, and loved it, and even struck up conversations with locals who were kind enough to humor his accent. But as the sun set each evening, Tom discovered another side of London, one filled with cozy pubs, hearty laughter, and pints of beer. It was during one of these pub crawls that things started to take a turn. That night, Tom found himself in a lively bar tucked away in Covent Garden. The place was packed with tourists and locals alike, all chatting, laughing, and enjoying themselves. Tom, feeling more carefree than ever, ordered drink after drink, letting the cheerful atmosphere wash over him. With each sip, his inhibitions lowered just a little more. At first, he stuck to light-hearted banter with his friends, joking about how different everything was compared to home, sharing funny stories from their travels so far, and making plans for the next day. But as the hours ticked by, Tom's jokes grew bolder. "You know what would be hilarious?" he said suddenly, slamming his pint glass onto the table. His friends turned to look at him, curious. "We should prank those royal guards tomorrow. You've seen those videos online, right? People always try to mess with them." His friends chuckled nervously, unsure if he was serious or just talking nonsense. "Come on, man," one of them replied, shaking his head. "Those guards don't move for anything. They're robots, practically." But Tom wasn't listening anymore. His mind raced with possibilities. What if he could pull off something bigger? Something unforgettable? After all, everyone back home would think it was hilarious. And besides, he reasoned drunkenly, it's not like anyone gets hurt when you have a little fun, right? By the time they left the pub, Tom's idea had taken root. He convinced himself, and eventually his hesitant friends, that it would be the highlight of their trip. As they stumbled through the dimly lit streets, laughter echoing behind them, none of them realized how far-reaching the consequences of this harmless prank might be. For now, though, Tom was too caught up in the thrill of planning his big joke to think twice about crossing lines he didn't fully understand. Little did he know, the clock was already ticking toward a moment that would change his life forever, a moment that would go down in both his memory and the collective consciousness of the internet as one of the most infamous stunts ever attempted near Buckingham Palace. The idea had started as a joke, but now it felt like a mission. Tom couldn't shake the thought from his mind. As he and his friends made their way back to their hostel after leaving the pub, the plan began to take shape in his alcohol-fueled brain. "Think about it," he said, his voice louder than usual, practically bouncing with excitement. "Those guards just stand there like statues. They don't even blink. What if we do something crazy? Something no one's ever done before?" His friends exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Jake, tried to steer the conversation in a safer direction. "Dude, those guards are, like, super serious. You can't mess with them. People have gotten into trouble for way less." But Tom wasn't listening. He was too busy envisioning himself as the star of some viral video, the guy who pulled off the ultimate prank. The more he talked, the more animated he became. "What if I burn their shoes?" Tom blurted out suddenly, stopping in his tracks. His friends froze, staring at him in disbelief. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional laugh from a group of tourists passing by. Then, slowly, Jake spoke up. "You're not serious, right? That's insane." But Tom was already nodding, his grin widening. Come on, it'll be hilarious. Just imagine the look on his face when he realizes what's happening. It's not like I'm hurting anyone. It's just a shoe. He laughed, slapping Jake on the back, as though this was the most brilliant idea anyone had ever come up with. Deep down, though, even Tom knew it was a reckless thought. Alcohol had a way of making bad ideas seem like strokes of genius. As they reached the hostel, Tom kept going on about the plan, refusing to let it drop. "We'll go tonight," he declared, pacing around the tiny dorm room. "No one will expect it. And besides, it's dark outside. We can blend in with the crowd." His friends groaned, torn between laughing at how absurd the idea was and worrying about the potential fallout. "Tom, you're gonna get us arrested," another friend muttered, burying his face in his hands. But Tom wouldn't hear it. He rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a cheap plastic lighter he bought earlier that day at a souvenir shop. Holding it up triumphantly, he grinned. "This is all we need. Easy peasy." The other side, knowing there was no talking him out of it now, they tried one last time to reason with him, pointing out how disrespectful it would be, not just to the guard, but to the entire country. But Tom waved them off, brushing aside their concerns with a dismissive laugh. "Relax, guys. It's just a joke. No harm, no foul." By the time they finally left the hostel later that night, Tom's confidence had only grown. Armed with his lighter and fueled by liquid courage, he led the way toward Buckingham Palace, his friends reluctantly trailing behind. None of them noticed the nervous energy crackling in the air, or the fact that they were about to step into a situation far bigger than any of them could have imagined. All Tom could think about was the thrill of pulling off his prank and the fame that would surely follow. What he didn't realize was that fame wasn't always a good thing. The streets of London were quiet as Tom and his friends approached Buckingham Palace. The grand building loomed ahead, its lights casting a golden glow over the crisp night air. Tourists still lingered nearby, snapping photos and marveling at the iconic sight, but Tom barely noticed them. His focus was fixed on the lone guard stationed near the gates, a tall figure clad in a red tunic and bearskin hat, standing perfectly still as though carved from stone. Tom's heart raced with excitement, or maybe it was the lingering effects of the alcohol. But either way, he felt unstoppable. He glanced back at his friends, who were hanging back nervously, whispering among themselves. "Come on," he urged, his voice low but insistent. "Just stay close and keep an eye out for me." They hesitated, exchanging worried looks, but ultimately followed him closer to the scene. As they neared the guard, Tom's confidence wavered for just a moment. Up close, the soldier looked even more imposing than he had from afar. His polished boots gleamed under the soft light, and his stern expression didn't falter, even as curious tourists snapped pictures or tried to get a reaction out of him. For a split second, Tom wondered if this was really such a great idea after all. But then he shook off the doubt. It was too late to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, Tom crouched down awkwardly, trying to make himself look casual despite the absurdity of what he was about to do. Clutching the lighter tightly in one hand, he stretched the other toward the guard's boot. His fingers trembled slightly as he flicked the lighter, producing a small orange flame that flickered weakly in the cool night breeze. Just as he leaned forward, the unthinkable happened. The guard shifted slightly, adjusting his stance. The sudden movement startled Tom, causing him to fumble and drop the lighter onto the pavement with a clatter. The sound echoed sharply in the otherwise calm atmosphere, drawing immediate attention. Tom froze, his eyes wide with panic, while the guard turned his head ever so slightly, locking eyes with him. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Other guards stationed nearby sprang into action, rushing over to surround Tom. Their voices boomed loudly, commanding him to step back and explaining the seriousness of his actions. Bystanders gasped, some shouting angrily while others whipped out their phones to record the spectacle unfolding before them. Within seconds, the area around Buckingham Palace transformed from a peaceful tourist hotspot into a scene straight out of a movie. Tom stumbled backward, his mind racing as he tried to explain himself. Wait, he stammered, holding up his hands defensively. It was just a joke. I didn't mean anything by it. But his words fell on deaf ears. The guards weren't interested in excuses. They were focused on maintaining order and protecting the dignity of their post. His friend stood frozen in shock, unsure whether to intervene or run for cover. By now, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves about what they'd just witnessed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about disrespect and stupidity, while others couldn't help but laugh nervously at the sheer audacity of the act. Tom's face burned with embarrassment as he realized how quickly things had spiraled out of control. What had started as a silly prank was rapidly turning into something far more serious, and there was no going back. Within moments, police sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Tom's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a harmless joke anymore. It was a full-blown scandal, and he was right at the center of it. The sound of police sirens cut through the night like a knife, slicing into the chaos that had erupted outside Buckingham Palace. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he watched two officers step out of their car, their faces stern and unreadable. The guards who had surrounded him parted slightly to let the authorities take over, but their piercing gazes remained fixed on him, silently accusing. It was clear they weren't about to let this go lightly. One of the officers approached Tom, his voice firm and authoritative. "Sir, can you explain what just happened here?" he asked, though it didn't seem like much of a question. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. How could he possibly justify himself? Instead, he stammered something incoherent, trying to piece together an explanation that wouldn't make him sound completely ridiculous. I wasn't thinking. It was supposed to be a joke." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "A joke," he repeated, glancing briefly at the guard whose boot Tom had nearly torched. The soldier stood motionless, his expression unchanged, though the tension in the air was palpable. By now, the crowd had grown larger, buzzing with murmurs of disbelief and outrage. Some people shook their heads in disgust, while others laughed nervously, unsure whether to find the situation amusing or horrifying. A few even shouted insults at Tom, calling him disrespectful and clueless. Meanwhile, Tom's friends hovered nearby, looking torn between loyalty and self-preservation. They wanted to help, but they also knew better than to get too close to the unfolding drama. One of them finally mustered the courage to speak up. "Officer, he didn't mean any harm," the friend said weakly, gesturing toward Tom. "He's just drunk. He wasn't thinking straight." The officer turned his attention to the group, sizing them up before responding. "That doesn't excuse reckless behavior," he said sharply. "This isn't just some random prank. It's a matter of public order and respect for our institutions." His tone left no room for argument. Whatever leniency might have existed moments ago seemed to evaporate as the seriousness of the situation became clearer. As the officer began questioning Tom further, another member of the crowd stepped forward, a middle-aged man holding his phone, which was still recording. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, addressing the officer. "I got the whole thing on video. Do you need it for evidence?" The officer nodded curtly, taking down the man's information before instructing him to send the footage to the station. Tom felt his stomach drop as he realized how quickly this incident was escalating. What had started as a drunken whim was now being documented, dissected, and broadcast to the world. Back at the center of it all, Tom struggled to keep his composure. His initial bravado had vanished, replaced by a growing sense of dread. As the officer handcuffed him, explaining that he was being detained for public intoxication and disorderly conduct, Tom glanced around at the sea of faces watching him. Some looked angry, others amused, but none showed any sympathy. For the first time, He truly understood the weight of what he'd done, and how badly he'd misjudged the consequences. By the time he was led to the police car, the scene had drawn even more attention. News crews were beginning to arrive, alerted by social media posts that had already gone viral. Tom caught glimpses of flashing cameras and microphones as he ducked into the backseat, his head bowed in shame. His friends lingered behind, whispering anxiously among themselves, unsure of what to do next. As the car pulled away, Tom stared out the window, watching the iconic streets of London blur past. The city he had dreamed of exploring, the one he had hoped would be the backdrop for unforgettable memories, was now the stage for his biggest mistake. And as the reality of his situation sank in, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a scandal that would follow him far beyond this night. By morning, the story of the drunk tourist who tried to burn a royal guard's shoes had exploded across every imaginable platform. Social media timelines were flooded with clips of the incident, each one capturing Tom's clumsy attempt and the ensuing chaos. News outlets picked up the story within hours, plastering headlines across websites and newspapers. Tourists' disrespectful prank sparks outrage. Royal Guard incident goes viral as public reacts, and American tourist faces backlash for Buckingham blunder. The footage showed everything. The dropped lighter, the startled guard, the crowd gasping in disbelief, and finally, Tom being led away in handcuffs. Comment sections erupted with heated debates. Some viewers expressed anger, calling Tom's actions disrespectful not only to the guard, but to the monarchy itself. Others found humor in the absurdity of it all, joking about how far someone would go for internet fame. A few defended him, suggesting that alcohol had clouded his judgment, though these voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of criticism. In the UK, public sentiment leaned heavily toward outrage. The Royal Guards were symbols of tradition, discipline, and national pride. To many Britons, Tom's stunt wasn't just a harmless prank. It was an insult to their culture and values. Talk shows and radio programs dedicated entire segments to discussing the incident, with hosts inviting experts and commentators to weigh in. One historian appeared on a popular morning show, explaining the historical significance of the Royal Guards and why such behavior was considered particularly offensive. "These men represent centuries of duty and service," he said gravely. "To mock them is to mock the very fabric of our heritage." Meanwhile, back in America, Tom woke up in a cold, sterile jail cell. His head throbbed from the previous night's drinking, but the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the sinking feeling in his gut. As he sat there, staring at the gray walls, fragments of the night came rushing back to him. He remembered the guard's stoic expression, the shouting crowd, and the flashing cameras. But what hit him hardest was the realization that this wasn't just a private embarrassment. It was now a global spectacle. News of the scandal reached his hometown quickly. Local reporters descended on his quiet neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking neighbors for comments. Friends and acquaintances took to social media to share their shock, some defending him while others distanced themselves entirely. His family, too, was thrust into the spotlight. His parents gave an awkward interview to a local news station, apologizing profusely and insisting that this was completely out of character for their son. "He's a good kid," his mother said, her voice trembling. "He made a terrible mistake, but we hope people can see past this moment." As the day wore on, the story continued to evolve. Late-night comedians joked about the incident, turning Tom into a punchline. Memes began circulating online, depicting him in ridiculous scenarios or photoshopping flames onto pictures of Buckingham Palace. While some laughed along, others criticized the mockery, arguing that the situation highlighted deeper issues about cultural insensitivity and irresponsible tourism. For Tom, confined to his cell and cut off from the outside world, none of this felt funny. He spent hours replaying the events in his mind, cringing at every decision that had led him here. What had seemed like a harmless joke under the influence of alcohol now looked like sheer idiocy. And yet, even as shame washed over him, part of him couldn't help but wonder, Was this really worth all the fuss? Hadn't people done crazier things before? But no matter how he tried to rationalize it, the truth was undeniable. This was bigger than him. This wasn't just about a pair of boots or a single misstep. It was about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of crossing them. As the hours ticked by, Tom realized that apologizing wouldn't be enough. If he wanted to move forward, he'd have to face the full weight of his actions and learn from them. The courtroom was small but packed with people, reporters scribbling notes, curious onlookers whispering to one another, and a few stern-faced officials who had come to ensure justice was served. Tom sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly together, staring down at the wooden surface as if it might somehow shield him from the weight of the moment. His lawyer sat beside him, flipping through papers and occasionally whispering reassurances, but Tom barely heard them. The room buzzed with anticipation, everyone waiting to see how this bizarre case would unfold. When the judge entered, the murmurs died down, replaced by an almost suffocating silence. The prosecution began their argument first, laying out the charges against Tom: public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and criminal damage, even though the shoe hadn't actually been harmed. But more than that, they emphasized the symbolic nature of the offense. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, her voice steady and commanding, this wasn't just an isolated act of drunken foolishness. It was a direct insult to the dignity of the Royal Guards and, by extension, to the institution they represent. This is not something we can overlook. She went on to describe the role of the Royal Guards in British culture, their discipline, their history, and their status as protectors of tradition. To many, she explained, what Tom had done wasn't merely disrespectful, it was an attack on national pride. As she spoke, Tom felt his face grow hot with shame. He glanced toward the gallery, where a few members of the public shook their heads in disapproval. For the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of his actions and how deeply they had offended others. Tom's lawyer stood up next, attempting to paint his client as someone who had made a regrettable mistake rather than a malicious offender. "Your Honor," he began, "my client admits that his behavior was inappropriate and ill-advised. However, it is important to note that this incident occurred under the influence of alcohol, which impaired his judgment. At no point did Mr. Last Name intend to cause harm or disrespect. He regrets his actions profoundly and wishes to apologize sincerely to all those affected." The lawyer then turned to address the court directly. "While we acknowledge the seriousness of this matter, we ask for leniency. My client has never been in trouble before, and this single lapse in judgment does not define him. We believe rehabilitation and community service would be a more fitting response than severe punishment." After both sides presented their arguments, the judge took a long pause, considering the evidence and statements carefully. Finally, she delivered her verdict. Tom was found guilty on all counts but spared jail time due to the absence of prior offenses and his apparent remorse. Instead, he was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, fined several £1,000s, and banned from returning to the UK for 5 years. As the gavel struck, Tom exhaled sharply, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. Relief because prison had been avoided, but guilt because the sentence didn't erase the damage he'd caused. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, shouting questions about his thoughts on the ruling and whether he planned to appeal. Tom ignored them, keeping his head down as he climbed into a waiting car. His friends were absent today. They had distanced themselves after realizing the extent of the scandal, and for once, Tom couldn't blame them. Back home in America, news of the sentencing dominated headlines once again. Some praised the judge's decision as fair, while others thought it was too lenient. Online forums erupted with debates over accountability and forgiveness. Meanwhile, Tom retreated into solitude, avoiding social media and canceling plans with anyone outside his immediate family. Every knock at the door or ring of the phone made him flinch, fearing another wave of judgment or ridicule. But amid the isolation, a small seed of reflection began to take root. Tom realized that while the legal consequences were significant, the emotional toll, the embarrassment, the loss of trust, the fractured relationships was far heavier. And yet, buried beneath the weight of his mistakes, there was also a glimmer of hope. If nothing else, this experience had forced him to confront his own flaws and consider how he could make amends, not just to the world watching, but to himself. The weeks following the trial were some of the hardest in Tom's life. He returned to his small hometown, expecting a quiet return, but finding instead a mixture of pity, judgment, and awkwardness from people who had once known him casually. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed him on the street, and old friends hesitated before calling or texting. Even family gatherings felt tense, as though everyone was tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, his infamous blunder. But instead of retreating further into shame, Tom decided he needed to do something meaningful. The hours of community service required by his sentence became an opportunity, a chance to prove that he wasn't just the reckless idiot plastered across headlines. He began volunteering at a local youth center, working with kids who came from troubled backgrounds. At first, it was daunting. Many of the teenagers were skeptical of this stranger showing up out of nowhere. But slowly, through shared laughter during basketball games and late-night talks about their dreams and struggles, Tom started building connections. One day, while helping organize a workshop for high school students, Tom found himself sharing his story, not because he wanted sympathy, but because he hoped it might resonate. Sitting cross-legged on the floor alongside the kids, he spoke honestly about what had happened in London. "I thought I was being funny," he admitted, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But my actions hurt people. They disrespected a culture I didn't fully understand, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that." The room fell silent as the teens listened intently. For some, it was the first time they'd heard someone openly admit to making such a big mistake. One boy raised his hand hesitantly. "Do you think people will ever forgive you?" he asked. Tom smiled sadly. "Some might, and some won't. Forgiveness isn't always guaranteed. What matters is learning from your mistakes and doing better moving forward." His words struck a chord not only with the kids but also with the adults running the program. Before long, Tom was invited to speak at other schools and community events, sharing lessons about responsibility, cultural sensitivity, and the dangers of letting alcohol cloud judgment. Each talk pushed him further out of his comfort zone, forcing him to confront his past head-on. Yet with each audience, he grew more confident, not in defending his actions, but in using them as a cautionary tale. In addition to speaking engagements, Tom reached out to organizations focused on responsible tourism. He offered to help create educational content aimed at travelers, emphasizing the importance of respecting local customs and traditions. His personal experience made his message relatable, and soon he was collaborating with travel bloggers and influencers to spread awareness online. Videos titled "What Not to Do" when traveling abroad featured Tom recounting his own missteps, often ending with heartfelt advice. "Think before you act. Respect goes a long way." Slowly but surely, public perception began to shift, at least among those willing to give him a second chance. While plenty of critics still dismissed him as irredeemable, others acknowledged his efforts to make amends. A few even praised him for turning a humiliating moment into something constructive. Interviews with major outlets highlighted his transformation, showcasing the work he'd done since returning home. Though the scars of the scandal remained, Tom no longer felt defined by them. By the end of the year, Tom noticed subtle changes within himself too. The weight of guilt hadn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, he carried it as a reminder, a constant nudge to stay grounded and mindful. He realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about growing beyond it. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel hopeful about the future. Though banned from the UK for 5 years, Tom knew he'd eventually have the chance to visit again, not as a careless tourist, but as someone who understood the value of respect and humility. Until then, he vowed to keep learning, keep teaching, and keep striving to be better. Because deep down, he knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't be the last chapter of his story. It would simply set the stage for everything yet to come. Years had passed since that fateful night in London, but Tom still carried its lessons with him every single day. Now, standing on stage under bright lights at a packed TEDx event, he took a deep breath, adjusting the microphone as hundreds of eyes focused on him. The screen behind him displayed the title of his talk, "How One Stupid Mistake Changed My Life." For a moment, he felt nervous. This was his biggest audience yet, but then he smiled warmly and began to speak. "I'm not here to tell you I'm proud of what I did," he started, his voice calm but sincere. "In fact, it's one of the things I'm most ashamed of. But sometimes life gives us moments that force us to grow up fast. And for me, this was one of those moments." He recounted the story from start to finish, sparing no detail about how alcohol-fueled arrogance had led him to make such a reckless decision. He described the chaos outside Buckingham Palace, the cold reality of sitting in a jail cell, and the global backlash that followed. As he spoke, his tone shifted between humor and humility, making the audience laugh at parts while reflecting deeply during others. He didn't shy away from acknowledging how foolish he'd been, but he also emphasized the importance of owning your mistakes. "What I learned," Tom continued, "is that growth often comes from discomfort. That scandal wasn't just something bad. I let it become something good. It taught me empathy, accountability, and the power of second chances." He went on to share how volunteering changed his perspective. Working with kids who face challenges far greater than his own reminded him of the privilege he'd taken for granted. Helping them dream bigger dreams made him realize he could do the same for himself. He talked about the workshops he created for travelers, teaching cultural sensitivity and responsible behavior abroad. "Every time someone tells me my advice, help them avoid a similar mistake, I feel like I've turned part of that failure into something meaningful." The audience listened intently, nodding along as Tom explained how forgiveness, from others and himself, had been key to moving forward. He admitted there were days when old memories resurfaced, bringing waves of embarrassment. But instead of letting them drag him down, he used them as fuel to keep improving. "When people ask if I regret it," he said, pausing for effect, "my answer is yes, but not entirely. Without that experience, I wouldn't be standing here today, sharing what I've learned." Sometimes we need our lowest points to find our highest purpose. As his speech drew to a close, Tom looked out at the crowd, his expression softening. "We all mess up. It's part of being human. What matters is what we choose to do next. Do we let shame hold us back, or do we use it as motivation to change? I chose the latter, and I hope anyone listening can too." The room erupted into applause as he stepped back from the podium, visibly moved by the response. People lined up afterward to thank him, many saying his story inspired them to reflect on their own lives. Reporters asked for interviews, and organizers invited him to speak at more events. But perhaps the most rewarding moment came later that evening, when an email arrived from a British woman who had initially been furious about his stunt. "Your talk reminded me that everyone deserves a chance to make things right," she wrote. "Thank you for proving that people can change." Tom read the message several times, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew he'd never erase the past, nor should he try. Instead, he embraced it as proof that even the worst mistakes could lead to growth, if you were brave enough to face them. And as he closed his laptop, ready to plan his next steps, he couldn't help but smile. His journey wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made all the difference.